Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our web conference, Adapting to COVID-19, Defending the Public Interest in Vaccine and Medical Development. Everyone at Access to Medicines Ireland would like to extend their thanks to our fantastic lineup of speakers and everyone who has joined us today to discuss how we can ensure equitable access to COVID-19 diagnostics, medicines, and vaccines. I know we all want to start hearing the experts, but first I want to go over some of the features of this Zoom conference which we are using today. Like many people in the world, we are really trying to adapt to our new virtual environment, so we really hope that this will go along glitch-free. During this conference, the speaker's microphone will be the only one that will be on. All other mics will be muted. This is so we don't cause much interference. At the end of each panel, there will be time for question and answers. If you have questions, please write them in the Q&A box, which is available for all participants to see. If you click the Q&A box icon at the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to access it there. While we may not have time to go through everyone's questions, we will flag questions that, as they come in and raise them with the panel during the Q&A session. And the chat box can then be used if people just like to make comments on what is being said. If you cannot make the whole conference, don't worry. It will be recorded and uploaded to our website, www.accesstomedicines.ie by tomorrow, April 8th. We encourage everyone to use the hashtags #AMILiveWeb and #COVID-19. We will see a poll box, you will see a poll box come onto your screens in the next few minutes. This will ask you if you want to be added to our mailing list to get more access to medicines related news and hear about our upcoming conferences. So let me introduce the ever fantastic Susan Mitchell, Deputy Editor and Health Editor of The Business Post, who will be our moderator for today. She is an award-winning journalist, well known for her coverage of Ireland's healthcare system, and her reporting has led to several national policy changes in this area. I also have the great honour of introducing Emily O'Reilly, the European Ombudsman, who very graciously gave up her time today to give today's opening address on this very important topic. Emily O'Reilly was first elected as European Ombudsman in July 2013 and has been since re-elected twice. As the European Ombudsman, she investigates maladministration into institutions and the bodies of the European Union. A former journalist, author, and political editor, Ms. O'Reilly has also written 3 critically acclaimed books on Irish politics and media. So without further ado, allow me to virtually pass the mic over to Ms. Emily O'Reilly.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Good morning, everybody, and let me begin by thanking Access to Medicines Ireland for the invitation to address you today. No one could have imagined that this conference would be taking place during a global pandemic, as the world looks to the scientific and medical communities for a way back to our normal lives and for an end to the suffering of increasing numbers of people. Your work speaks directly to this crisis. Issues including research capacity, access, funding, data sharing, clinical trials and pricing in the development and rolling out of new therapies, medicines and vaccines come or will come sharply into focus, revealing the extent to which control in the public interest is exerted over matters that will determine the ultimate human cost of this pandemic. Inequalities, as we see, are already laid bare. Families with no access to outdoor space, senior citizens exposed in nursing homes, poor and low-skilled workers compelled to work in unsafe environments, refugees and asylum seekers unable to move to safety. How will these inequalities play out if and when the vaccines and treatments arrive? Will health be viewed as a commodity or as a public good? Will political leaders recognise that national self-interest is best served through global collaboration? The Trump administration is reportedly attempting to buy its way to the top of the queue for vaccines, with a recent effort made to attract a German pharmaceutical firm to produce a vaccine for its exclusive use, while reports of the effective piracy of essential medical supplies around the world are also growing. The Western world also paid attention to the development of a cure or treatment for a mass infection in the 1980s, when the HIV epidemic took hold. At that time, and for many years afterwards, AIDS was a death sentence. I knew several young Irishmen who died of the disease, but later many others were lucky enough eventually to receive the antiretroviral therapy that would save their lives. But the AIDS epidemic did not end there. In 2018, just 2 years ago, over 750,000 people died of HIV-related causes globally, 61% in Africa. Dedicated work has nonetheless brought the global figure significantly down, and mortality in Africa has also dropped by almost 40% since 2010. But the gap between the developed and the developing world is clear when it came to the provision of life-saving medicines. The history of that time is also instructive vis-à-vis research funding, access, pharmaceutical and scientific rivalries, the extent to which governments do or do not exercise control over the development and rollout of therapies and treatments, and who ultimately gets them. The world is now in full panic mode, with governments galvanized to find an end to an unprecedented crisis. People hope that a strike by the coronavirus at the epicenter of the world's largest economies will make the search for a vaccine or for effective treatments move very fast indeed. The capacity of governments to take extraordinary measures, if they choose to, is also clear. From the US administration ordering car manufacturers to produce medical devices, to the enforcement of highly restrictive lockdowns on citizens everywhere. The extent to which those governments will use their powers positively to intervene in the pharmaceutical and other relevant private industries to ensure optimal outcomes will be an important marker of how this situation is managed and hopefully resolved. This is, of course, a unique situation, visible to all, and with fewer hiding places for poor or unethical decision-making by governments and by industry. People are normally unaware of access issues, apart from times when a public plea is made for access to a drug judged either too experimental or too costly. Awareness is also raised when a medicine is found to cause harm and a subsequent trail of deception is unearthed. As European Ombudsman, I monitor the EU institutions and agencies, including the regulatory European Medicines Agency. And I commend that agency for the accessible and useful information it is currently providing about the pandemic and about the development of possible treatments and vaccines. EMA will approve any future vaccines in Europe, an enormous task, given the tensions between the world's desperate need for a vaccine and EMA's fundamental duty to ensure the safety of any such vaccine. The biggest issue I deal with concerning EMA is the transparency of the medicines data that it holds. When the Ombudsman first inquired into the transparency of EMA in 2007, EMA was a black box. It did not make publicly available all the information it had relating to the approval and monitoring process, citing the commercial interests of the pharmaceutical companies and data protection rules. Our work, combined with pressure from the European Parliament, led EMA to change its entire policy. It now makes public all documentation relating to the approval of drugs, with the sole exception of the personal data of patients, and despite significant pushback from the pharmaceutical industry. I've also looked at the approval process. I recently, for example, received a complaint from an Irish citizen whose infant son suffers from a rare variant of cystic fibrosis. He believes that an as yet unapproved drug for children will help his son. My inquiry seeks to find out if EMA has dealt with the evaluation as quickly as possible, given that EMA must satisfy itself that this medicine is safe and effective in children. That inquiry is of obvious importance for the child concerned and his family, especially as cystic fibrosis patients are particularly threatened by the COVID-19 pandemic. It also has resonances for future vaccine approval. EMA will be asked to conduct the approval processes as quickly as possible, while trying to ensure that the approval process is scientifically and medically sound. Vaccines are sensitive. Too weak an immune response provoked and they will not be effective. Too strong and the illness may become even worse. Proof of safety and effectiveness will be shown only by complete and extensive clinical trials, which will take time. When, hopefully, the vaccines do come on stream, the public will trust the approval process, and the uptake of these vaccines will create necessary levels of immunity. The transparency of the approval process is therefore vital to building that necessary trust. Health authorities will be under great pressure to act swiftly. They may be willing to pay any price for hope, but that carries a risk of ineffective outcomes, even abuses. The more eyes on the decision-making, therefore, the better. History will look back on the actions we take today, and it will judge harshly those that did not base their decisions on sound principles in the public interest. I commend the important work of Access to Medicines Ireland, and I thank you again for inviting me to be part of today's very important conference. Thank you.
Emily, thank you very much. That was a really excellent speech. And also thanks very much for the work that your office has done in actually ensuring that Emma has become so much more transparent in recent years, because obviously I think it's something that most people who have tuned in to this conference today feel very passionately about. So thank you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Now, after Emily's excellent speech, I wanted to let people know that we now have a panel coming on board, a really excellent panel, and some of you will know these names. We have Professor Sam McConkey, a Professor of Infectious Diseases at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, who is going to discuss COVID-19 treatments that are on the horizon. Professor Luke O'Neill, who is who's based at the School of Immunology in Trinity College. He will be discussing a frenzy of activity, the vaccines, antibodies, antivirals, and anti-inflammatories that doctors, researchers, and scientists are looking at to crack COVID-19. I'm also hoping he might touch a little bit on the hope that the BCG vaccine holds out, because I know that there's a number of studies being carried out into that and the possible protective measures that might generate for people. We also have Dr. Andrew Hill of the University of Liverpool, who's going to discuss drug shortages during the COVID crisis that are already existing and may worsen. And finally, Dr. Ellen Doan, who works at the School of Medicine and Legal Policy in the States. And she's going to discuss learning from the past, so what we can learn from previous outbreaks and epidemics. So they will all talk for about 5 or 10 minutes each. And after that, we're going to open it up to the floor, and I will be taking questions from all of you in the audience. So I'd like to firstly welcome Sam McConkey. Sam, if you would take the camera.
Thanks. Thanks, Susan. Is the sound working okay? You're hearing me? That's
yes,
great.
I am indeed. Perfect.
Thanks. I was hoping.
Are you in your scrubs?
Well, I'm a regular hospital doctor. I was hoping to welcome you all this morning to our beautiful new lecture theatre in RCSI on York Street, and that was the original plan. It's sad that this is where we're at, but the world has changed. So I guess I'm an RCSI staff member and professor, and we're one of the co-organisers of this conference. I've been watching this COVID-19 very, very closely in Wuhan and Hubei since January, and essentially looking at what the Chinese government at provincial level and national level have been saying about the outbreak since January, often in Chinese, and trying to back translate it and then modeling the numbers. And once it was clear that this spread outside of China and started to spread in communities in many other countries, then unfortunately it became clear that this was going to be a really worldwide pandemic of completely unusual proportions, as we're seeing. So what I'd like to talk about next minute is really looking at the scientific ways forward in terms of treatments and preventions. The quickest way to develop an effective scientific intervention for something is to reprofile an existing registered medicine. And we've all probably seen Didier Rault is a very experienced parasitologist from Marseille. He's now a bit like Asterix and Obelix promoting hydroxychloroquine, and has decided that maybe hydroxychloroquine works. Apparently he's got 122 people who've taken it, and they've all done fine. There isn't really a good control group, and there's so much variability in this disease that, in my view, you can't really make any conclusion from 122 cases where there's no control. So that's a hypothesis at this stage, of course, a hopeful one. I've used it a lot, of course, for malaria, and I've taken it myself for many years to prevent malaria. It's widely used for rheumatoid diseases, so it would be fantastically simple if that worked. It might be just too simple to be true. Other drugs that are being considered, the angiotensin receptor blocking enzymes, block the protein on human cells and pneumatocytes that the virus used to gain entry. And there's some trials going on at looking at reprofiling the angiotensin receptor blocking drugs. then on the shelf, many of the drug companies, a bit like, to take the HIV analogy that Emily mentioned, AZT, as the Dovidine, was the first drug that Glaxo applied for HIV. They had it on the shelf as an anti-cancer drug. It was already manufactured. There was some basic toxicity, some basic animal PK studies, and then it was rapidly used for HIV. Of course, as we know from the Dallas Buyers Club, initially at the wrong dose, and it had a lot of toxicity, and it certainly isn't a drug we use very much anymore. But that first study in the Lancet that showed 3 months prolonged survival using AZT monotherapy brought great hope and great positive research in antiviral drugs to bear for HIV. So I feel that by using something on the shelf, and of course Gilead now have remdesivir, which they've had ready for Ebola and MERS. They're scaling up production and scaling up clinical trials in Japan and Europe and China for this. So I'm hoping that that unlicensed drug, but already developed drug, may work. It looks like it inhibits the antiviral enzymes, so it may work. The third possibility is to develop new products. Unfortunately, there you're really looking at a 3, 5, 7 year product development lifespan to take something from basic chemistry into production, and then into clinical trials in animals, and then in animal model, and then into humans. So that may be where we're at. It may be that, you know, like HIV, it was from 1981 we discovered the thing, the clinical syndrome, and it was only in 1995, that's 14 years later, that we really had effective therapies. So we could be looking at a long haul here. The drugs can be used for 3 things. One is prevention. So many of us are frontline healthcare workers, so taking something like PEP or PrEP equivalent would be great. Number 2, an antiviral that prevents the virus replicating, so people who are at an early stage can abort the severe, horrible consequences of intensive care and respiratory failure. And then third, of course, treatment for those people with ARDS, adult respiratory distress syndrome, which is more of an inflammatory cascade that destroys the lungs and causes protein and fluid and to move into the lungs. So that's a different class of therapies. I'll briefly mention vaccines because I've spent a lot of my life developing them. The typical vaccine cycle in humans from concept to product is 7 to 10 years. In the animal world, it's about 3 to 5 years. So when they cut the sort of corners and have to make a vaccine for something in dogs or cats or sheep, you're looking at a 3-year-ish product cycle to develop the product, prove it works, and then distribute it, market it, regulate it. So again, I suppose I'm pessimistic that we're going to have a solution to this technically in the next 3 to 6 months. I think we're looking at 2-3 years for a possible vaccine. If we move away from the sort of technologies then and look at the bigger picture, who's sponsoring this? Some things like BCG, of course, are not so much patentable. They're older and they're around for years. So a lot of those trials are investigator initiated, either funded by public money, by Bill Gates, by WHO, or by investigators. Of course, the remdesivir is a Gilead product, so their Gilead are sponsoring that trial. And of course, they have a track record, if you like, of making some of the best HIV drugs that we have. We use a lot of them and they're great. And also they bought over Pharmacet and brought to market Sofosbuvir. So now they have also a reputation, I think it's fair to say, of charging an awful lot of money. And Sofosbuvir came on the market at something like $60,000 per person per cure, which is an outrageous amount of money for most people in the world. So we're left with this challenge of drugs that are effective and work and safe, but which people can't afford. So this is partly why we're enthusiastic about this conference idea, that we need to look at new ways of distributing drugs and rewarding the people who develop them in an equitable way. So it's not just sort of a winner takes all winner at the end. I would broaden the research to learning about behavior. How do we help people to wash their hands, to stay isolated? How do we help hospitals and nursing homes to prevent transmission? What do we need to do to prevent asymptomatic spread and pre-symptomatic spread? So there's a lot of medical research going on. And that, of course, involves distribution of products like gowns and gloves and masks and so on. So I'm happy to leave it at that and take questions on the panel. I'll say thank you for the privilege to speak here. And I'm sorry we're not in RCSI. And
great. Great, and
really
actually, Sam,
space.
just to say, actually, the plan is just for all of the speakers to deliver very short speeches, and then to have a panel discussion where we'll then take questions from the floor, if that's okay. If that's okay with you. Great, thank you for that. So look, after and thanks for that, Sam. after that, I just want to see if Professor Luke
Yep.
O'Neill has joined us.
I am indeed, Susan. Yeah, can you hear me?
Great. Hi,
Yep.
how are you?
Hi there.
This is going very smoothly so far.
It's going great.
So...
Fingers crossed.
Absolutely. So look, fire ahead.
Grand. Thank you very much, Susan. A big thanks for Kieran for inviting me. What a fantastic topic, and I'm delighted to take part. We keep getting asked the question: if a drug comes along, who can afford it and who will get it? You know, and my job, really, in one way, is to tell people what's going to be coming down the track in terms of science. But of course, the big question is who will get access, and people keep asking me. So I'd love to see what's going to happen this morning in our discussion. Now, I think the second thing I'd say is there's a massive spotlight being shone on everybody right now. Politicians, first and foremost. There was a great Economist article 6 weeks ago saying this virus will test every political system, and that's what's happening. Secondly, of course, our healthcare workers, they're our first concern, and we must support them. And they're all, and everybody says this, and it's becoming a truism. They do a fantastic job. Big spotlight on them and the pressure they're under. The scientists, of course, are being scrutinized, mainly because stupid studies are being published, which must be looked at. The rules of engagement have changed. A lot of pre-published stuff is coming out unrefereed, and that's a concern to us all. Now, this can be justified because it's an emergency, but equally, the standards of rigor in science are not being met in many of these studies, so the scientists are being looked at. What scientists are saying is being looked at, including myself and Sam. We're always being asked, aren't we, Sam? And it's difficult for us, you know, because there's no definitive answers, and scientists just give probabilities in the end. And of course, people don't want to hear that. They want a clear answer. And then of course, us scientists are being watched because, you know, people want, and we all want clear answers, but it's a real challenge for us as well. And then of course, the drug discovery business. I think this is the biggest spotlight ever shone on pharma. I suspect the pharma sector will change radically as a result of this. And I'll give you a couple of examples in a minute. So really the spotlight's on everybody, and the world we will emerge from after this is over will be a different world for definite. And in the case of pharma and biotech and drug pricing, this has to be a good development, I bet you. Now, Sam did a great job on telling you the various approaches. You've all heard them in spades, I guess. I might just give 2 or 3 examples myself. So let's start with BCG, Susan, because that's around at the moment. Now, I've worked on BCG for donkey's years. If you're an immunologist, this is bread and butter, because it's a fantastically powerful immunostimulant. It was the vaccine for TB, of course, and still is in many countries. Dorothy Stopford-Price, I always mention her, she brought that to Ireland in the late 40s and saved millions of lives effectively. And would you believe the HSE of the day didn't want this brought to Ireland for various reasons? Anyway.
No, I didn't know that, okay.
Very strange. Anyway, Dorothy, there should be statues to her all over Ireland. Anyway, it turns out it was good for childhood TB. Millions and millions of people have had it. Now, there have been a literature that began about 30 years ago, actually, where clever physicians noticed that people who had BCG were protected against measles of all things. And then malaria cropped up. And the next thing, respiratory diseases. These were somewhat anecdotal. In the past 10 to 15 years, that's got much better. This vaccine protects against other infections. It does it by boosting what's called innate immunity, which is my bread and butter, actually. It puts up a barrier that repels many germs, it turns out. Now, that has provoked 7 separate trials running right now, and it's a fascination. There's one in Holland, a friend of mine, Mihai Netea, is leading that one. There's one in Australia with healthcare workers. There's one in Germany with elderly people. So we're going to see now, again, it adds to the mix. You know, there's many trials running with many different things. These trials have begun. And then last week, 2 papers came out suggesting an association between BCG usage in countries and a lower rate of death. Both of those papers had many flaws. There were confounding variables, but there was a trend there that got our attention, especially given the BCG studies anyway and the science behind BCG. It really got my attention. We know the mechanism of how this BCG works, by the way. It causes what's called epigenetic reprogramming. Won't go into the details. Now, and then yesterday, a Johns Hopkins group published a 3rd paper showing the association. That's the strongest paper of the 3 so far. They acknowledge the confounding variables and so on. So there's something going on here with BCG. And we see that as a bridge to a vaccine, because this will not be a specific vaccine. It won't, it isn't against, SARS-CoV-2, but it could provide a non-specific boost that will protect you against COVID-19. And I'm getting loads of emails, Susan. I had 3 this morning about this, right?
Wow.
Very clever guy who worked for UNICEF and the WHO for years on the BCG vaccine. A guy in his 70s emailed me. And he says, I believe in this, he says. That's the first thing, right? The second thing he said was in Ireland, he said, maybe there's more deaths in the north because they stopped vaccinating with BCG. And it could be about the kids. It's not about the adults. How would someone in their 70s be protected with a vaccine that was given to them 50 years ago? It could be the kids are getting vaccinated and they're protected and they aren't spreading it to old people. That's a possibility. So we're now looking at the possible mechanisms that may or may not be true. Remember, anybody listening in, this is very experimental. If you've had the vaccine, you aren't necessarily protected. That's really important. Keep washing your hands, keep the hygiene. It's another scientific idea that's being explored, and we add to the mix that Sam mentioned. And it's great to have as many shots on goal as possible. So that's the BCG one. Now, I've only got 5 minutes, which is a physical impossibility for me. So, there's two other things I want to mention about the drug pricing thing that's intriguing, in my opinion. So J&J are out front with the vaccine development. There are 41 companies developing vaccines as we speak. Great promise, great hope. We really believe it will work. That's 99% of immunologists saying there's hope with this virus. It'll take 1.5 years at a minimum, as Sam mentioned. I know guys who've worked on malaria for 30 years and never got a vaccine, okay? HIV still won't yield, you know, although there may be hints of both of those yielding. But it's a very difficult business. Now, 41 companies, good God, let's hope one of them works, right? J&J are putting $500 million in themselves. The US government are matching that. And the CEO of J&J said it will be a free vaccine. Now, this is interesting. It's partly, it has to be set up. Secondly, hello?
Yeah, you seem to be back, actually, Luke. You're back.
Oh, yeah, Morgan came up there for some reason. So J&J, very interesting. They've said it'll make it free. Let's start with that, okay? Gilead, as Sam has mentioned, they have been in trouble over the hepatitis C drug. That worked, of course, in great effect for hepatitis C, fantastic, but there was a very high price. And that can be discussed, I suppose. What was that justified? Because health economics comes into this as well, remember, and all those questions. Anyway, they have the antiviral remdesivir. If that works, that will be a massive contribution. Again, there's questions around it. Trials are running as we speak. We'll know in about 4 weeks, by the way, because it's a pretty quick trial to run. Optimism, it works in a test tube. Many things don't work from the test tube into the human. So we need to, again, wait for the double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. And there's loads running with remdesivir. There's optimism. That will be the big one because that will lower the viral count massively in people, and that's what we want. So now the question is, again, who will pay for it? And can they make enough of it? And those are the questions coming to. They stumbled Gilead, as you probably all know. They went for orphan status, and then they withdrew the request, which was really bad PR, actually. So we'll see what's going to happen with that. But anyway, fair play to them. They've got a drug, and it worked in Ebola, you know. So let's see what happens with that one. And I think then, in the meantime, then I want to finish with hydroxychloroquine. That's getting worse, in my opinion, Sam. And remember, we all like the look of that because I worked on chloroquine as well back in the 80s. It is an anti-inflammatory. We were involved in some of the anti-inflammatory properties of that molecule. There had been some evidence it was antiviral as well. Would you believe the 1918 flu pandemic, the #1 treatment was quinine, and they killed people with the wrong dose? This is incredible. And hydroxychloroquine is a safer version of quinine. So there was this stuff about antiviral things. This guy Raoult, I mean, they called him Get a Fix, by the way, from he's not Obelix, he's Get a Fix. He seems to be a radical. Now that trial was really, it was interesting. It was open label, which can be justified, by the way, in an emergency. You can do an open label trial in cancer. There's flaws in that trial. There's no doubt about that. The big concern I would have about hydroxychloroquine is side effects. And there's anecdotal stuff online where a trial in Paris, 30% of the people given that drug had a dysfunctional dysrhythmias in their heart. Now, what's happening there is this is a COVID-19 population. It's not normal people. It's not like some with lupus, where it's approved, by the way, or arthritis. COVID-19 affects the heart. If you put a drug into someone that's potentially cardiotoxic, who's surprised to see possible ill effects? So now that doesn't take away from all the trials. They know about this. In fact, in the Raoult trial, they measured people's heart function during the trial. So he's not stupid, is he? Lots of trials are running, including in Ireland, by the way. Ireland's joined the network to examine hydroxychloroquine. And let's see what happens. They won't harm people, hopefully. We need a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. It is justified to do the trial as long as it's carefully monitored. But these worries are there with that drug. And I think, and we don't want to mention the Trump guy, do we? That's, my head goes into my hands whenever he opens his mouth. If I was in America and a scientist, I'd be hanging my head in shame. So we got to be very careful here, you know. But yet again, it's a shot on goal. Let's see what happens. And of course, the other thing is, Susan, that's worth mentioning. He's a hero in France because it's anti-big pharma in a way. It's a drug that's cheap as chips, remember. You can get it off the shelf. It's not some fancy remdesivir, is it? Right. His work on chloroquine is kind of seen as, you know, the Gilets jaunes angle on this in a way. He's on the cover of Paris Match, you know. And again, you got to watch that. I hate seeing that. We don't want scientists on the cover of popular magazines. It's the worst thing in the world, right? So we got to watch this carefully. Still, I'd finish with one last comment. I sent the thing around last night. There are 41 vaccines being tested, 23 anti-inflammatories as we speak in trials, you know, which will stop the damage of this thing. And then I think it's 6 antivirals, I think in total at the moment, are all rushing forward. Let's not lose our scientific rigor and the standards we have to apply scientifically. You can take shortcuts a little bit. It's an emergency, but you've got to apply the bog standards that we have for drug discovery and vaccine development. And it's all about safety and efficacy. And in terms of the timeline, my optimism is remdesivir. If that works, it'll be available in the next 3 months, maybe. The second thing is antibody therapy. Didn't mention those. They're looking very promising as well. That could be September. If the BCG trials read out, and they will be reading out in the next 3 months or so, that could be a massive contribution, because now everybody gets BCG, you see. So in other words, we remain optimistic, and we keep applying the scientific rigor to ensure science is done properly in this disease.
Great, thank you very much, Luke. That was really excellent. And just to keep people, to keep viewers, listeners in the loop, for those of you who might have just joined us, we just had Professor Sam McConkey, an infectious disease specialist, talking before Professor Luke O'Neill of the School of Immunology at Trinity College Dublin. We're going to have another two speakers, Dr. Andrew Hill at the University of Liverpool, who's going to talk about drug shortages and COVID-19, and also Dr. Ellen Doan, who is a passionate advocate for access to medicines and has a keen interest in intellectual property. So we're going to have Andrew will speak for about 5 minutes, and after that we will have Dr. Doan, and then I'm going to open up to the panel for a discussion and on the various topics that our speakers have touched on, and we'd also love to get questions from you in the audience. So I'll pass over to you, Andrew. Dr. Hill, if you would now take to the camera if you're there.
Okay, can you see the slides?
Actually, I can. That's very impressive. Yeah.
Wonders of modern technology. Okay, so as the last 2 speakers have been saying, we've got probably 18 months where we're almost certainly not going to have a vaccine, and we're relying on antiviral drugs to maybe prevent the infection, drugs to treat the symptoms. And my team, in the past, we've looked at how much it costs to make a whole range of drugs. We've worked with the World Health Organization on the essential medicines list. We've looked at hepatitis C, at cancer, tuberculosis, and we've basically applied the same methods for all these treatments that have been used for other indications, but they've been what's called repurposed for coronavirus. So we're just trying them out. It's in the experimental phase. And if you look at the structure of some of these drugs, you look at remdesivir, favipiravir, lopinavir, ritonavir, there's a whole list of them. And they're quite simple molecules with established methods of synthesis. People have made them for many years in some cases. So we have a database called Panjiva, where we can look at the import and export of these drugs all over the world. We can see where they're made. We can see how much a kilogram of what's called API costs. Now, API means active pharmaceutical ingredient. So it's a kilogram of the raw drug before it's turned into a formulated medicine. Where we don't have that, we can look at the published routes of synthesis. We've got a professor of molecular chemistry who can estimate cost of API production. So we can look at how much the drugs cost to make versus the published prices in the British National Formulary, in the US drug lists, etc. By the way, this is all confidential. This is going to be published on Friday, so I'm just presenting you ahead of the game. Okay, so let's look at remdesivir, for example. So our professor of molecular chemistry has estimated that a kilogram of remdesivir can be made for $4,000 US. It's actually going to come down to 2,000 with upscale, but we're being conservative with these prices. So to treat somebody for 10 days, you basically need 1.1 grams of remdesivir, which would cost $4.40 when produced at scale. You then have to put in various factors. You have to look at the loss of drug substance during the formulation. You have to put in an ampule, and then you've basically got the cost of formulating the drug, and then a profit margin, taxation, transport costs. But basically, the cost of remdesivir is approximately $9 US if produced to the same scale as drugs used for global access programs, TB drugs, malaria drugs, HIV drugs. We're talking of hundreds of thousands of doses, which is what we'd need. So you've got $9 for remdesivir. Then you've got favipiravir, this drug from Fujifilm in Japan. It's a very simple molecule. We've estimated $1,000 per kilo, but it's probably going to be far less than that. So again, a kilo, if a kilo costs $1,000, a 14-day course costs $16.80. And then once you've put in the cost of formulation and profit margins, you're talking $20 for 14 days of treatment. Now, we then looked at all the other drugs, so like hydroxychloroquine. I mean, this is fundamentally a cheap drug. It's over 60 years old. But if you look at the prices in various countries, what you'll see in these graphs is that US pays the most out of anybody, almost for anything. And then the generic prices are on the bottom right-hand corner. So I'll just move that. So you can see a 14-day course of hydroxychloroquine, $1 US, and it's being sold for higher prices. So you then got chloroquine. It's just incredibly cheap to make. It's probably cost more for the bottle than for the pills. So then you've got azithromycin, this antibiotic used with hydroxychloroquine in the French study. Again, it's incredibly cheap to make. And then you've got lopinavir, ritonavir, Kaletra that's been used and had quite disappointing results in the early pilot studies. A 2-week course of Kaletra costs $4 US. It's available through the Global Fund for $9 US. And the same drugs being sold in the US for $350 to $500. Then you've got sofosbuvir declatosvir. It's being tested in Iran and Uruguay in 2 pilot studies, encouraging results from the first studies in Iran. Now that costs through the VA system, the Veteran Affairs in the US, $18,600 for a $5 drug. It's available in Pakistan for $6, India for $7, Bangladesh for $166. Pirfenidone, now this is a drug used for people already with pulmonary symptoms. It's a drug normally for pulmonary fibrosis. 9,600 US pharmacies, and it's a $31 drug to make, $100 in India. Tocilizumab, this is the one drug that's still expensive. We're still working on the cost of synthesis for this one, but it's in the US it's $3,300 versus a $500 injection in Pakistan. So you can see all the prices here, and basically you get the same trend that these drugs are incredibly cheap to make, and you could mass produce them for basically $1 a day for anything, except for tocilizumab, which is a monoclonal, but we can get the price down for that to probably about $100 US per injection. So just to summarize, if these trials work, and we've got to remember there's a big if here. We don't know if which of these treatments is going to prove successful. We might need a combination, but we can aim for a target price of approximately $1 US per person per day, and often much less, and that includes remdesivir. For remdesivir, the cost of the saline is going to cost more than the actual drug. It's that cheap. So if these drugs are effective, they could be mass produced so that anyone with coronavirus in any country could afford them. We've already got mechanisms for ensuring access. We could follow a similar model to either the Global Fund or PEPFAR, which have already shown how mass treatment for HIV and TB and malaria is feasible with drugs sold close to the cost of production to treat millions of people. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Now, can I just double check that Dr. Doan has joined us?
I have.
Great. I'm not seeing you come up on the video cam just yet, but
I see myself.
I see you now. I see you now. And
Okay,
can I
good.
just double check, Dr. Doan, because it's not on the literature, but is it? Are you based in France or the Netherlands at the moment?
At the moment I'm in France.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I'm not so far from Marseille actually, so I see all.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Access to Medicines Ireland. I would have, of course, preferred to meet you all again in person and go out for a pint later this afternoon, but I guess that's going to have to wait some other time. A lot of what I meant to share with you today has already been said, so I'm going to try to be brief and focus a little bit on what possible approaches could be for the challenges ahead of us should vaccines and medicines proven to be effective that are currently under development. Because of course that is what we would like to see. We want effective treatments and we want effective vaccines available at affordable prices so they can be used in all countries concerned all over the planet. Now, the likelihood of that happening automatically is close to zero. And I say this based on about 30 years of experience working on these issues in other disease areas. And already in the last few weeks, we've seen a few moves from companies that were unhelpful, to say the least. Gilead, probably under pressure of its investors, the investment bankers have urged the executives of the drug companies to develop strategies to profit from this crisis. Gilead leadership pushed back, but also at the same time applied for an orphan drug designation. So that did not look very good. They've rescinded that since, which is good, but not after quite a bit of pressure. In my home country, the Netherlands, there's been a huge conflict between Roche and the government when Roche could not deliver enough of a substance needed in its testing machines, hampering the rollout of the testing for COVID-19. Pharmacists in principle could make that fluid, but Roche did not want to disclose the formula and the technical specifications to make sure that it could be used in its machines. That required huge political pressure to force them to disclose that information. They did in the end. We've heard about Johnson & Johnson, who's developing a vaccine. They're very optimistic. As head of research announced that it will be available early next year. Remains to be seen, but he also announced a price of €10 per vaccine. If that is indeed what they plan to do, then this may sound okay for us. I have €10 in my wallet, but for most of the people in the developing world, that means no access. And of course, fighting a pandemic while only giving access to the most important tool to a few countries won't do a great deal. We've also seen governments respond to some of these issues, particularly the issues related to the intellectual property barriers. Some countries have been quite swift in amending its national legislation, its national patent law, to enable swift use of compulsory licensing. That is a legal mechanism that lifts the monopoly effect of a patent that could potentially be important for remdesivir. Patent expiry dates are quite far in the future for that compound. Israel already has issued a compulsory license for lopinavir/ritonavir. Patents are held by AbbVie, and it's interesting that the day after that, AbbVie dropped its patents globally for all indications, including for HIV. So these compounds are now in the public domain. So these are developments that those of us who work in the HIV world, those were long battles that took months, and we see now in days responses. So we can take a little bit of comfort for that, because it's good to see governments act, but this approach, which is case by case, country by country, is not going to be the answer. And there are some lessons that we can learn, of course, from HIV, particularly what not to do. In the developing world, medicines to treat HIV and AIDS did not become available until 10 years after they had become available in the North. The medicines patent pool played a very important role to make sure that generic low-cost medicines could be made available on a very large scale, but it took 10 years to establish. Now, what we see today is enormous public sector investment in the development of these of medicines, and particularly of vaccines and other tools that will be necessary to respond to this pandemic. That also offers options to attach conditions to that financing, because in fact these technologies currently under development need to be, they can't go to market in the business as usual model. We need a new way of doing that. We need new norms that establish that these technologies and these tools are public global goods. That is absolutely key. We need mechanisms to make that happen. 2 weeks ago, this is why Costa Rica made a proposal to the World Health Organization to establish an international COVID pool, a place where intellectual property, data, knowledge, know-how, technology, software, you name it, can be shared for everyone to use, to make sure that that cannot become the propriety to one country or to one or a few cooperation. This proposal is gaining very rapid, significant support. The medicines patent pool has expanded its mandate so it can work on COVID-19 globally. Unitate, an important financing mechanism in global health, has freed up resources for such innovative approaches, and have informed Dr. Tedros from the WHO that they're willing to help make this happen. The pharmaceutical industry is beginning to make cautious positive noises, which is of course important, because initially this would work on a voluntary basis. So all the stars are aligned. What is needed is more governments speaking out in favor of this and supporting WHO in making that happen. While it is understandable that governments today are focused on domestic needs, they also need to come out of their somewhat nationalistic shell and endorse global initiatives and global approaches, because no country can do this on its own. This pandemic can only be overcome if all work together, if all will benefit from the new tools, from the new vaccines and medicines currently being developed. And as I said, for that we will need new norms. COVID-19 tools need to be global public goods. The IP, knowledge, know-how needs to be shared, and that needs to be reflected in the conditions for funding of research that is currently being spent on these new tools. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Doan. Thank you for that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're now going to, excuse me, open up to a panel discussion. I know some people have sent in some questions. We'll have that discussion for approximately 30 minutes and then have a little break before we return to our second session of this morning. But first off, I believe that Dr. Ruth Freeman, who is Director of Science for Society at the SFI, has joined us and has a question. So if I could ask you, Dr. Freeman, to put your question to the panel.
Thanks so much, Susan. Nice to see everyone today. It's been a really interesting discussion. And I think following on from what Ellen has just said there, you know, there's never been a more important time to talk about public investment and research and how we as the taxpayers want to invest that money that we're spending. At Science Foundation Ireland, we're doing a number of things in this crisis, but not to take up time for discussion. One of the things that we've done is, in collaboration with all of the other major research funders, we've launched a rapid response call to look for research and innovation that may help to manage, mitigate, and I suppose on an ongoing basis help us to deal with, live with COVID-19. I think one of the challenges, and again it comes back to some of the things that Ellen was saying, was how do we make sure that we are prioritizing that effort? How do we make sure we're keeping the scientific rigor that we need, that Luke spoke about? And how do we make sure that we're making sure that there's a global connectivity there between what's going on? So I suppose my question in terms of what we're doing and what the research community are doing is, what would the panel see as the critical ways that Irish research teams can contribute? You know, where should we be focusing our effort? We're seeing loads of great work. The research community have stepped up in terms of, you know, providing PPE, looking at reagent production and some of the things that we need. But in the broader picture, when we think about behavioral change, supporting contact tracing, social isolation, where do the panel see researchers could really step in and make the biggest difference?
Thank you very much for that question. Now, it's a little tricky because we're obviously all operating on Zoom. So what I might do is to begin with, see if either Professor O'Neill or Professor Sam McConkey would like to respond to that question.
I can have a go first, Susan. I mean, yeah, as you know, Ruth, it's a fantastic response from the Irish scientists in many ways. I mean, every lab was asked to give up equipment and reagents, which we all did very willingly. I think the lab are now working in for volunteering to do with the testing. So that's one immediate place we see it happening among scientists. Second, I guess even more important one is, though, obviously the research side, and it's great SFI put this call out because that gives us all a chance to galvanize our efforts. I know every immunologist is eating, sleeping and breathing COVID-19 at the moment, you know. So the fact that we can have an Irish-backed consortium of some kind, which we're exploring in various ways, as you know, is superb. Because all our research could be relevant here. Who knows who's going to crack this? It could come from anywhere. And there's some great ideas among Irish scientists as well. The other thing to mention is we have Irish patients to analyse, and they add to the mix as well. So I think what we'll see now is, again, it's this notion of a spotlight. So if you're an immunologist, there's a big spotlight on you now, you know. And how are we responding to that? And we all want to make a difference. To be a scientist means to make discoveries that count, and COVID-19 is another example of a really important problem that science is trying to crack.
Now, could I just say thank you for that. Could I see if Dr. Doan or Professor Andrew Hill would like to respond to that question from Dr. Freeman?
I mean,
no.
No,
great.
sorry. Sure. So what I was going to suggest, and I guess this is an international issue, is to have some sort of dashboard and set of systematic reviews going on every month to look at all these different strategies for treatment, so that people can know, you know, which drugs to prioritize, which drugs to cross off the list. It might be that some of these don't work. You know, the results were quite disappointing for Kaletra, for lopinavir, ritonavir. I think the jury's still out on hydroxychloroquine, but to have very regular systematic reviews, I think because at the moment there's this explosion of clinical trials. People are, I mean, quite rightly, they're trying anything that they can get their hands on. But I think we're going to have a phase probably in the next 3 months where we actually hone down and concentrate on a smaller number of molecules, because we're going to need to have a short list to know what to mass produce. Because once we get, say favipiravir works from Fujifilm in Japan, they've got stockpiles, but there are no factories in the West that are making it. It's made in China and Japan. So we'll have to somehow streamline things at some stage.
I get chip in, Andrew, there. You're absolutely right. I mean, the big question for me is what constitutes scientific rigor now, okay? In other words, there will be a number of papers coming out. Some will be on this bioarchive, not even refereed. How do we judge all this literature? And how do we say that works is a very important one here? How do we know that thing works? Yeah. And that we bring our scientific know-how, our scientific training, you know, what we're about as scientists, to that question as best we can. Now, clearly, scientists' heads can be turned by something, and we're all human, you know? But we need a collective opinion. The mask debate is a great one, Andrew, in my opinion, and how the CDC changed their guidelines. And I rang, I know a guy in the CDC, so I asked him. He said they spent 2 weeks trawling the literature, you know, and looking at all the evidence, going back 25 years on masks, and came to a decision, you see. And that was stick a cotton thing over your face, and then Trump says he won't do it, you know. So, but you know, for me, it's all about the scientific method, isn't there? The spotlight is on that as well, by the way. What does it mean to judge things as a scientist, you know? And what rigor we bring to these things? And is a 5% effect of remdesivir enough to approve it? Probably not, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Could I ask Dr. Doan, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I want to make one comment. I am not the best person placed to set the research priority agenda. I leave that to others. But what is important, that while all of that work is going on, is that at the same time we think about the access once products become available. If we postpone that work, if we postpone that thinking and the design of the mechanism that are needed at the global level, until those tools become available, we will be too late. We'll be behind. We will be behind the curve. That is work that needs to be done now, and that will require, of course, political action. And that is a challenge at a time when governments are very much focused on the immediate domestic needs. But if any of you are in a position to nudge your politicians a bit towards thinking about that, please do so, because at the international level things are moving, but it would benefit from having national governments come in. And also a very important role, of course, for those who are engaged in the financing of this research, to say we will attach conditions to the financing, and it would be important if you could, for example, say if this money leads to a promising result or a promising product, that will be shared and that it can be done through the mechanism that the WHO is currently looking at.
Great, thank you. Dr. Freeman, does that address your question? Oh, Sam, welcome back.
Thanks, I'm sorry, I just took a call there. I'd like to contribute that at research level, Susan, I believe that research on behavioural modification factors and appropriate use of gloves and gowns and masks will be helpful. So looking at within a nursing home, within a hospital, what techniques and technologies are better for helping people to use PPE to reinforce the need for almost behavioural change studies. That I know we're thinking about access to medicines and tablets and vaccines, but a lot of our response so far has involved testing equipment, as we mentioned already, but also personal protective equipment. And my view is that science and scientific rigorous studies with control groups can also help us to do that better.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, that's so helpful, because we've launched this call, but we want to be reactive. So if there's particular things that we want to ask the research community to respond to, we know they're so reactive when we ask for help. So, I mean, it's great to be able to say to people, look, that's actually a really critical need, and we would like to do that. But I also think, following up on Ellen's point, and I mean, Luke, you've so much experience of this, the fact that I think we've set up good systems now in Ireland for public-private partnership with research, which really protects the public investment through our IP models, where the universities essentially continue to own the IP that's developed, you know, and it can be licensed in a very responsible way. So hopefully we're well placed to move some things along quickly. But I mean, I would just say, from an SFI point of view, for those of you on the front line, and you know, we're so grateful you're all there, but if there's particular things that you need, please contact us, because we will do our best to find the right research teams, to link them internationally, and to fund them.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Freeman, for that. Now we have a number of questions that are coming in from different people who have tuned into the webinar today. So I'm going to start with one from Dr. Kieran Harkin, who many of you will know from Access to Medicines Ireland. And he has asked, I think we slightly touched on just now, but does the panel believe that the WTO should endeavour to ensure that IP rights are not a barrier to access to COVID treatments? And I'd like to go to Dr. Doan first for that question, and then invite the other panelists to join.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very important question. The WTO, the World Trade Organization's rules for the protection of intellectual property allow for flexibilities. That means countries can take certain measures when patents, for example, form a barrier. But there are other forms of intellectual property, such as, well, the orphan drug designation would have been one, would have given Gilead 7 years of exclusivity. That is not happening, but that is not an exclusivity that you can compulsory license. Now there is one, so there is some leeway that countries have if voluntary licensing or voluntary measures do not work. They can intervene. There is one particular problem that is now becoming very clear into focus. And that has to do with the special compulsory licensing for exports, because a normal compulsory license is for predominantly the supply of the domestic market. That means that those countries that depend on import for their medicines, NHS, for example, depends for 70 to 80%, I believe, on imports for its medicines. You would then have to persuade another country to issue a compulsory license so that a company can produce to export it to you when you need it and when you need to take those measures to deal with patent barriers. Now, in 2003, when the TRIPS agreement was amended to allow for this special export compulsory license. A number of high-income countries, including the European Union, said unilaterally, we pledge that we will never use this mechanism. We opt out of this mechanism. That means that European Union member states, also the United States did the same, cannot use this mechanism to import drugs from elsewhere when they are produced under a compulsory license there. That is, this sounds all quite complicated, and it is to a certain extent, but a simple response would be, or a simple immediate response would be for those countries to request the WTO to opt back in. A secondary response should be an examination at the WTO whether there aren't better rules to be designed to address these issues. So on the one hand, there is a lot of space that should be used when necessary. Let's hope it isn't necessary. Let's hope that this international mechanism will come off the ground. And second, countries have unilaterally put restrictions on their own ability to use these mechanisms, which they need to lift now.
Thank you. Professor Hill, could I ask you for your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think we need to remember with these repurposed drugs for coronavirus, the companies didn't design them to work. I mean, this is a brand new disease. They're working by chance, if they work at all. A lot of the trials have been run with public money, with Gates Foundation, different ministries of health, China, where the drug companies donate drug, they actually get a tax rebate. They can actually make money by donating drugs for the trials. And the money spent by the pharma companies in almost all cases is very small and could just be repaid to them. So I think in this special case of coronavirus, there's a case for just buying down the company's research, saying, how much did you spend? It might be a very small amount of money, and then taking over the intellectual property and making sure that we can mass produce the drugs to treat anybody in the world. We haven't got time to get into all these long wrangling discussions about IP for drugs that the company's never intended for them to work on coronavirus because it's brand new.
Could I see if thanks for that. Could I see if either Professor O'Neill or Professor McConkey would like to weigh in on that question? No. Okay. Well then, my next question actually is how significant the public contribution to research on COVID-19 in Ireland is, as in the research that is carried out by hospital doctors and universities. I think we seem to have a little glitch with our technology here. Is Professor McConkey there?
Yeah,
Great.
Sorry, I was off taking a phone call, Susan, I'm sorry. I've been in and out, so apologies.
You're busy, we totally understand, so please don't worry.
So the challenge is that we're trying to look after a lot of sick patients, and we're trying to reorganize our whole hospitals. And at the same time, some of us are doing an awful lot of kind of public media and even political briefing. And then at the same time, with those 4 jobs, you're also trying to design good research trials. So it's in the middle of all this, it's been challenging to try and get good research trials. Then initially we didn't have enough patients. So now we are seeing numbers going through that allow us to do good studies. But 3-4 weeks ago when we were planning them, it was hard to get access to funding of drugs because we didn't have the patients. That's if you don't know how many patients you're going to have. So what we're doing is really working with existing networks, so groups around the world that we've been working with and trying to build large groupings that allow us to have bigger sample size. You do need many hundreds of people to sort of show anything, and you need hundreds again in a control group, and you need a solid methodology that everyone on each site is following in the same way. So the only work that, well, we've done 2 bits. One is on modeling that we've sent off for publication, and the other is on cytokine response and trying to understand the changes in lymphocytes and neutrophils and chemokines and cytokines that we see in people with severe COVID-19 versus people with mild COVID-19 versus normal healthy people. And the answer is there's lots of things you see. There's a lot of dynamic stuff happening in the immune system. Trying to work out what's the causing what is more challenging. So there's certainly a very large immune response, and we're seeing that, looking at, in fact, some of the Chinese have done a very good job on looking at chemokine and cytokine response. But I think it's too early. I don't have any credible results that I can tell you right now that we've produced here, but we're working on studies and and trying to come up with some results.
Okay, thank you. Professor O'Neill, could I ask you to...
Yeah, I mean, in St. James's, we've got a institute in James's. Every patient, the samples are being taken. All the things Sam mentioned are being measured in them, you know, because you can get really good information from this. And you are measuring the immune system in these patients, basically, and how it's changing over time. So that's a very informative thing to do. Severe, if the disease becomes very severe, there's clear biomarkers that predict that. There's all very good science going on. And I'm also refereeing papers from around the world as well. I mean, I just refereed a paper, get this. This just shows you the Irish scale versus China. It was a paper with 2,000 patient samples were assessed, right? Everything was measured in those patients. We call this multi-omics, as Sam knows. You know? So every possible thing was measured in these patients. And they came to some very interesting conclusions, and I've just accepted the paper actually this morning. So it is a global effort. The Irish have their part to play. There could be specific things about the Irish population that would stand out. Hepatitis C was a great example of that, by the way, because of anti-D, as people might know. So the Irish patients, it's great they're playing a part in this, and we may discover things in those patients that might be useful. And then as Sam said, the clinical trial bit, it's good that the Irish patients are getting access now to some of these experimental drugs, and let's see what that tells us as well. So I think patient participation is essential, actually.
Thank you. And could I ask, actually, it's a question that is very much geared or directed towards Professors O'Neill and McConkey. What can the Irish government do to advocate at a global level? What steps can it do? And does it have much clout? Can it even do much? We're a very small country, obviously.
I wouldn't be expert in what the government can and can't do, sadly, Susan. But SFI's initiative at HOB is fantastic. Let's start with that. They're putting money up to fund networks. And what's very important about the SFI initiative is it's very internationally connected. So in other words, our labs are connected with labs in MIT, in Harvard. Best practice, fantastic, you know, and building that international dimension is essential. So first of all, public funding for research is a great thing to see. The policy stuff, I will leave that to my betters there. I think the Irish government would be great to be a voice. The very stuff Ellen was talking about. The Irish government should be in behind that. Look what the Israelis did for it. That's really, Ellen's talk I thought was brilliant, by the way. Look what the Israeli government did. The Irish government should be doing the same.
I mean, if we didn't have public funding of research, we wouldn't have people like Luke and Sam here doing their work. So that's the starting point. We need experts. Every country needs its own depth and expertise in areas related to medicine. But the call is international, so our researchers can use it to work internationally. And we're also at SFI working with Irish Aid, because that dimension of a global health issue is very important. Now, we haven't got any specific projects yet, but luckily we had just set up a partnership with them to do just that. So we're starting seeing projects coming through on climate change and energy that have that global perspective, and Irish researchers want to work on them. And as Irish taxpayers, we should be contributing our share to that global effort.
I think perhaps the question was probably geared more towards, although it's not entirely clear, but was geared more towards what the government could do around intellectual property rights, etc., that companies might try to hold on to. So perhaps Dr. Hohen, you might have a view on that.
Yeah, I think it would be important for Ireland. Ireland is part of what's called the Benelux, which is a subset of European countries that work together on questions related to access to medicines and medicines pricing. And that might be a good coalition to take this issue to. And say, as Benelux, shouldn't we have a position on the proposal of the COVID-19 pool at the WHO and signal to the WHO that we want this to work and that we lend our support. Of course, having the backing from research institutes, from researchers themselves would be quite important. I think many researchers are worried about the outcome of what they are engaged in not becoming available or not becoming available on a large enough scale. So build this coalition, and that would have to happen quickly because things really develop and take place at a very rapid pace. But that might be a very good starting point, because in the Benelux you're already working with governments, with sort of like-minded governments that have sorted out some of these issues amongst themselves already.
Actually, could I just ask you a question on that Benelux group, Dr. Doan? Have they had much success? Because we joined that group, and I think we also joined a separate grouping in the South or in Southern Europe as well, that tries to, I suppose, whereby governments and experts in different countries put their heads together on different drugs that are coming down the tracks. But I don't believe that has there been much success in that. You know, have countries jointly purchased many drugs via the Benelux group?
No, they haven't yet. But I think that that's precisely what will change. You know, the new, if we go back to the normal life, it will be a new normal life. So much will have changed, and particularly in this area. So what we've seen in the Benelux and what a lot of European countries have experienced with access to medicines and trying to negotiate better prices, that it is very, very difficult to negotiate with someone who holds the monopoly. I think the corona crisis is driving a lot of new thinking and a lot of new setting in this area, which will have a spillover beyond the corona crisis and products to address the pandemic more broadly.
Okay, thank you. Another question that has come through is a question around PPE. You know, we've seen countries, and Emily O'Reilly alluded to this earlier on in her opening speech, you know, countries trying to take PPE shipments from other countries by offering to pay more money. I think somebody, you know, described it as modern day piracy by the United States. You know, when this pandemic hits lower and middle income countries hard, what are the possible scenarios regarding the accessibility of PPE and vaccines in these countries, and how can we act early to ensure that they do get access?
I think, Susan, if I could speak to that, I think in the last number of years there's been a sort of a tendency towards nationalism, which we've seen obviously in US and UK and Hungary, several other countries. And unfortunately the responses of many countries to coronavirus has been to put up barriers and walls and act in a more nationalistic way. That's partly because our health services in Europe are organised at the level of nation state and are not coordinated in a detailed way across the European Union. But one of the things I think we have to do is try and promote multilateral decision making and international responses to this. It's quite possible that several euro users might try and leave the euro if it could fall to bits in part because of this. Similarly, it's a threat to the EU. In my view, the actual existence of the EU could be called into question through this coronavirus, because it may affect different parts of Europe differently, and depending on how we stick together through the crisis. So my view is that our Irish government really needs to promote, as they have done for the last 100 years, this international solidarity in responses. And I feel that's been lacking a bit in, you know, certainly in the European Union. Obviously the UN has taken a lead role, and certainly WHO has. And I think that also we need to stick in solidarity with low and middle income countries. Ireland has 7 or 8 countries where we do a lot of Irish aid work. Stick with the partnerships we already have and try and promote testing and PPE and control, and whatever we can do to help those partner countries, I think should continue.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel like to come in on that question? Okay, well then another question that came through is for Professor Hill. Someone asked, could you just remind us when your work is going to be published? I think you mentioned Friday, but perhaps you could just confirm that.
Yeah, it's this Friday morning. So
and where is it being published?
The Journal of Virus Eradication. We've done a lot of publications in there. They've got a special fast turnaround for papers on coronavirus.
And just generally speaking, could I ask the panel, do you see capacity issues, you know, across the world if drugs, you know, drugs to successfully treat COVID-19, you know, are proven to work? And if vaccines become available, are we going to see widespread shortages, or can we manage that?
There are already with that, Susan. So, I mean, you got to give credit to the pharma sector as well. Remember, and they're changing. Now, this is the broader question: after COVID-19, will they maintain this change? And what about beyond this disease? You know, what about other infectious diseases, for example? They're all, I mean, GSK, who I've got a conflict of interest, I consult for them, they said they will switch over some of their vaccine manufacturing plants to help with this. They're making their adjuvant available, a very powerful immune stimulant available. I know AstraZeneca have a subsidiary called MedImmune. They're real experts in making antibodies. Again, they're saying we will switch our systems over to make these things. And we're seeing that. Now maybe it's apple pie stuff, I don't know, but and Ellen might have a stronger view than me, or other people maybe, but the message I'm getting is everybody's aware of the scaling up crisis that will come. If any of these, how do you scale it up? And they're all, as we speak, they're now looking at that, supply chains, how to change a plant over to this instead of that. So it's very much in people's minds. The question again would be, who's going to pay for it? Will Big Pharma pay for all this? I don't know. I suspect they will, because they're trying to make a difference as well, remember. Again, talk about the capitalist system collapsing. Maybe the pharmaceutical sector will be the first to become like, I don't know.
So you're optimistic.
I'm making jokes here half the time, so don't come at me.
I think it's just, it depends what sort of solution works. If it's a small little chemical molecule like remdesivir that's relatively easy to make, it's not that different from the little nucleotides that make up our DNA and RNA. It's easy to synthesize in bulk and relatively cheap. You could sort of, as I said famously to the Sunday Mail, you could reprofile the Viagra plant in Cork to make remdesivir. And that's feasible. Whereas if it's some complicated large monoclonal antibody, that's a difficult thing to make. And that's going to be really, really challenging to scale up a monoclonal antibody for 8 billion people in the world. So it actually depends what exact chemical nature the successful product has. And we hope it's a simple, easy to synthesize one.
But it's unfortunately, it's not just the new drugs that are a problem here. You've got all these basic generic drugs used to manage to look after people when they get ill with coronavirus. And in France, in New York, they're getting terrible shortages of really basic antibiotics, of anesthetics. And I mean, I had a long chat with people in Paris last week that literally running out of the drugs. And
Could I ask you, I'm sorry to cut across you there, Professor Hill, but could I ask you, is that because just facilities have not had the time to ramp up quickly enough, or because many of the ingredients come from, say, China, where supply chains have been interrupted? But what's the cause of that?
Well, there's three things. First of all, because of the epidemic, the supply of the basic raw ingredients was shut down in China for 8 weeks. And then a lot of the drugs are then sent from China to India to be formulated. And because of India went into lockdown, the transport started failing there. So you've got supply slowing down. Plus you've got demand just off the scale. You've got drugs being used 20 times the current rate. So you've got this sort of perfect storm. And I mean, the French were within 2 or 3 days of running out of everything. It's not just them. King's College Hospital in London was complaining about it. There was a letter from 9 different European hospitals saying, right now we've got to have these basic generics. And I mean, you might have a company like GSK that has their own branded drugs. They're in control of the whole supply chain. But these old generic drugs, you're relying on maybe single or 2 API suppliers in China, and it's something that really needs managing at a European level. I think there are European commissioners getting involved in this, because it's an issue for right now. It's the shortages are really bad.
Susan, this is the toilet roll issue, actually.
Yeah.
Way.
Wow.
It is, because every health agency, and I've had the same thing as Andrea said, they're buying up stocks to try to make sure they don't run out.
Yeah.
Like the basics aren't available.
What I might do, just to say to the panel, is I've received so many questions, which is fantastic, but we are keen to try to wrap up, as we had planned, this session at 11:30. So what I might do is, go through these questions and perhaps just get 2 panelists to respond to each question, so I can, so we can actually try to answer almost all of the questions that have come through. So the first one is from Evelyn Mulroe of Cancer Trials Ireland, who said speed from protocol to regulatory submission is crucial in COVID-19 trials. Cancer Trials Ireland is experienced in running trials and is offering support to the community. How important is a centralised approach to trials in COVID-19 when speed to getting treatments to patients is critical? Any takers for that question?
Well, I can speak to that. I think the centralised approach is really helpful, and Cancer Trials Ireland have a network of 8 or 9 hospitals already, have a research database manager, data entry people and research nurses in that. I suppose the question is that big enough? The challenge is that many of the studies are being done in multiple countries with researchers from maybe 20 or 50 sites involved. So I think the answer is yes, but perhaps also on an international dimension as well as just a national one.
Would anybody else like to respond to that question? Okay. Then I also have one from James O'Mahony, who is an economist at Trinity College Dublin, and many of you will already know James. I do. Hello, James, and thanks for joining. He has asked, if we want private R&D spend as part of the solution, which obviously we do we not need to recognise that firms will either have to earn profits in order to recoup R&D costs, or they will have to incur costs as part of a corporate social responsibility effort? The latter, he said, might not be enough to require or to encourage the level of spending we actually need. If I could ask Dr. Dohan to come in on that question.
Well, I think we first need to recognize that the public sector contribution is significant. We spent as the globe last year 50 billion, 58 billion, 54 billion on the purchase of vaccines. That is, in a sense, that is public money, because it is money that comes out of our public institutions that is spent on the procurement of vaccines. So there are significant resources in the private sector that can be deployed. I am not at all against reasonable profits, but maybe the profit-driven mechanism here is not the best way to go. I would say, let's create the activity on the innovation side. Let's spend the money directly on the innovation. Let that market bloom, so to speak. Then we don't need to worry about prices and profit and making profits from selling the products. That could be at minimum level to make sure that the systems are oiled sufficiently to keep the production and the supply going. But let's focus on spending the money on the innovation side. Corporations, where a lot of the knowledge and compounds and technology sits, can make an enormously important contribution, but they won't be the only ones. And then we will also get the collaboration on that side, because that's where the action need to be. So this is not so much a discussion about should they be allowed to make profits or not. No, this is about what kind of a mechanism do you want to put in place to make this work.
Professor Hill, I'd love to, if I could just ask actually, and then I'll come back to you if that's okay, Professor O'Neill, because you've done a huge amount of work on the costing of medicines. Could I ask you to respond to that question from James O'Mahony?
Yes, I think it's up to for the repurposed drugs, the ones for right now. The drug companies need to be very honest about how much exactly they're spending on these trials. I think we're going to find that for the majority of the trials, it's a very small amount of money, and they could even be repaid for that. But I don't see why a drug that's fundamentally cheap, that wasn't designed to treat coronavirus, should just be allowed to be launched at its original price for other diseases. I just don't think there's any economic rationale for that. I mean, if these drugs are fundamentally cheap, and we've developed them, we've run the trials with public money. I think all bets are off, and that the drug should just be mass produced. We don't have time otherwise.
Professor O'Neill?
Yeah, just very briefly. So, I mean, if hydroxychloroquine works, and I remember it may well work. I know I was plus minus a bit earlier, but it may work. If that happened, look how cheap it is. Andrew told us it's cheap as chips. Yeah. Any company could make that, any generic company, in bulk, and now it's available. So let's see what happens there. But more generally, I think you got to remember it's a very complex ecosystem, this drug discovery business. It needs investment, at risk often. You need venture capital to back it. That's the reason why that's there. Big pharma, of course, is a successful industry, and they have reserves of all kinds. But did you know, now maybe someone listening will correct me, not a single drug was discovered in the Soviet Union, over the course of 50 years, not a single medicine, they think. And the reason is it didn't have the entrepreneurial VC commercial side going aggressively as well. So it's not as straightforward as it seems. But I do think we're going to reinvent it, Susan. I mean, as I said earlier, when we come out of this, pharma will have changed and the models will be different.
Just and final question to the panel before we break. And you mentioned that it kind of builds upon your point there, that pharma will have changed, the model will have changed. Do you think, because it's something that's always surprised me, it probably doesn't really apply, unfortunately, to you anymore, Professor Hill, but those of us who are still in the European Union, are you surprised that we haven't jointly procured and jointly purchased drugs And is this perhaps, will this be the trigger that we need to start going down that road?
I think it's very scary how a lot of the countries, including the UK, have just become very insular, and you've had these bidding wars for scarce supplies of drugs. It's just not going to work like that, because you'll end up with some countries having massive shortages while other countries are hoarding and don't necessarily need the supplies that they've bought. It's going to need to be centralized. I think actually more fundamentally we need to think about European local production, security of supply. I think what this epidemic has shown is that we assumed that the Chinese would always be able to make all the raw ingredients, the Indians would always be able to formulate them, and that system would be secure. It's like the banking crisis, thinking the banks will never fail. Well, the supply chain is failing, and you've got these tragic situations in hospitals in Italy and France where they're literally running out of drugs. And I think it just showed that we need new stress tests on the pharmaceutical supply chain in the same way that we've got stress tests on the banking system. It's a lesson that we have to learn.
Thank you, Professor Hill. Would any of our other panelists like to come in on that final question about the European Union?
Well, I think, and Professor McConkie already made a similar comment. It is worrisome how nationalistic the approaches are. I'm a great supporter of the European Union, and I'm a proud European, but I'm also shocked at the lack of solidarity within the European Union, and that is something that would need to be re-examined. As I said, it's to a certain extent understandable that national governments look at national needs at this stage, but I hope that will very rapidly change, and that a sense of stronger solidarity will kick in. Now, as to the healthcare system in Europe, that is not integrated. We have an integrated market. We have an integrated market for pharmaceuticals, but we don't have an integrated way of making sure that those pharmaceuticals are available and affordable to all. And I would suspect that is also something that might change in the near future.
Well, look, on that note, I'd like to say thank you to all of our speakers and panelists this morning. We're obviously all here under very unusual circumstances. The technology seemed to work a lot better than I had, a lot more smoothly than I had expected. I thought we'd have a few more glitches than we did, so I'm pleasantly surprised. So Professor McConkie, Professor O'Neill, Dr. Hill, Dr. Doan, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us all and to share your expertise and insight with us. It really is much appreciated. To those of you who have tuned in, can I just say that we're going to be back at 11:40 with our second panel of the day, which is talking about the opportunity for socio-cultural and political reform. There's some excellent speakers lined up. Kay Curtin, a patient advocate, Jackie Brown, another patient advocate, Dr. Gail Kerkorian, a patient advocate who with the IHREC Disability Advisory Committee, Mr. Darren O'Rourke, who is a TD, a well-known TD, and also a scholar, who is going to talk about the politics of access and medicines reform, and finally Dermot MacDonald, who also joined us last year from Just Treatment. So I'll see you all back here hopefully at 11:40. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, Susan.
Oh, hi. Hello, how are you? I just wanted to make
Hi,
sure I was
Susan.
actually there. Sheila, is it?
Yeah.
Hi, how are you doing?
Not too bad.
Can you hear me, Susan?
Who's up there? Sorry.
It's Kay.
Okay,
Hi,
hi,
yeah.
how are you doing?
Hi, Susan.
Good, yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
And Jackie's here.
So I'm checking any others. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, how are you?
We're live at the moment. Just
Okay. So are we ready to start? Hi, folks. I'm just checking. Are we ready to start?
fire ahead, Susan. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I think we have all our speakers. Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for rejoining us. I hope you all managed to get a quick cup of tea or coffee on the break there. As I mentioned, for our second panel discussion this afternoon, the topic that we're focusing in on, or the area that we're focusing in on, is the opportunity for socio-cultural and political reform. We have a really great panel, and well done to Access to Medicines for organising such a brilliant panel today. We start off with Kay Curtin, a patient advocate who I know. Thank you, Kay, for joining us, and also Jackie Brown, another patient advocate. Then Dr. Gail Kerkorian, who works with MSF, or Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, is going to be speaking on the need for radical changes to ensure access to essential health tools. Darren O'Rourke will also be speaking for a short period. Darren is a TD and also a scholar. And finally, we're going to finish with Dermot MacDonald of Just Treatment, which has done a huge amount of campaigning over in the UK in recent times, especially around cystic fibrosis drugs such as Orkambi. So at the end of the panel discussion, like what we did earlier this morning, or after they've spoken, we're going to open it up for a discussion, and we will be taking questions from those of you who have tuned in. So please do feel free to submit any questions that you'd like to ask our panelists today. And we'll have a panel discussion of about 45 minutes when our speakers have given a brief outline of their views on their respective topics. So if I could start off, please, by welcoming Kay Curtin. Kay, you're very welcome, and if you'd like to take the stage.
Before I start, I just want to thank Access to Meds again for asking me to speak today. It's always a great pleasure to be part of this group. I was asked to discuss what it's like to live without access to the treatment that you might need. And unfortunately, having stage 4 cancer made me very aware that when it comes to getting treatment for your medical condition, particularly if the treatment is innovative or expensive, nothing can be taken for granted about gaining access to medicines. We all know that daily life is generally easier to cope with despite its many obstacles and anxieties, if we believe, or at least buy into the narrative that when you have the misfortune to become seriously ill, all the stops will be pulled out on your behalf. But unfortunately, this is a fallacy of the well. Whilst there might be much goodwill on behalf of your medical team to do all that they can on your behalf, they are all too often constrained in what they can offer because of decisions made by government bodies beyond the front line of the hospital or the general practice clinic. Although your desire as the patient may lie with receiving the latest groundbreaking medicine, the reality of accessing it can be a harsh awakening for the patient. You may find yourself on the roulette wheel of access that I spoke about at last year's Access to Meds conference, where your timing of diagnosis, your geographical location, knowledge of your physician, your government's policy on reimbursement, or even your ability to pay will become the defining factors that work against you or with you to determine your chances of survival or living with the best achievable quality of life. Last year, I gave an example of delays in access to adjuvant treatment for stage 3 melanoma patients. 1 year later, this has shamefully remained static, now leaving us one of the last in Europe yet again to reimburse a new treatment. This story is replicated across many diseases and disabilities. We are often failed by the system as patients and the drive to make profit over saving lives. We're reimbursing at such a snail's pace in Ireland, we cannot possibly keep pace with research in the clinical setting. Continuously, I see posts from our HTA advising reimbursement only recommended if cost effectiveness can be improved relative to existing treatments. That does not tell us anything about the human cost to these patients, waiting months and even years for new treatments that may be more effective in reducing their pain or prolonging their lives, and are generally available elsewhere. I'm fearful now of an even more barren reimbursement landscape post-COVID-19. As resources become scarcer and are directed towards conditions considered by government departments, cost-benefit scales as being a better investment. Unfortunately, right now, we're already seeing evidence of this added hurdle of COVID-19. Already, we've seen the suspension of cancer screening programs, routine surgeries, treatments, follow-up CTs and MRIs. Patients already in the system are rightly worried about accessing care, and they're afraid of being considered dispensable. They're living on a tight rope until a solution for COVID-19 can be found. Those who have already been left endlessly to wait understand this is not an unfounded fear, but now this threat is in.
Oh, okay, you seem to.
Okay.
You're back, sorry, there was a tiny glitch, but you're back, don't worry.
Okay, those who have already been left endlessly to wait understand this is not an unfounded fear, but now this threat is in danger of becoming reality for many thousands more who may have up to this recent crisis been living well with their disease or disability. Jonathan Cooper, a human rights specialist, wrote recently in a blog called Dignity, the Right to Life and the Coronavirus, to seek to establish yardsticks which would value one life over another, would fundamentally undermine the core principles of human dignity, and to even contemplate drawing up criteria that would formalize the suggestion that one person's life is worth more than someone else's could not be countenanced. But this need not prevent difficult choices being made, but each one is on an individual assessment. Some big questions will have to be asked in the coming months about how we treat the ill in our society, and many more will suffer if we fail to act in a way that values humanity and dignity over economic outcomes. This will affect each and every one of us, but some more directly than others, because they will pay with their lives. If we don't continue to value the vulnerable and provide timely access to medicines.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. And now I'd like to welcome Jackie Brown, who, as I said earlier, is a patient advocate and is also on the committee with the Irish Human Rights Equality Commission. And Jackie is going to discuss ethical concerns, questions and imperatives from a patient perspective in a pandemic. Jackie, thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you, Susan, and to everyone listening in today, and to AMI for the invitation to speak with you this morning. I want to make you think about a few questions and issues from a patient perspective, as a patient advocate involved across a range of organisations. So it is widely acknowledged, as we know, accepted and fully respected that we're in a time of crisis with this COVID-19 pandemic in Ireland. However, there's also an awful lot of unease amongst patients and patient groups to find that the Department of Health, the Irish Department of Health, in the last week of March, very quietly issued a document entitled An Ethical Framework for Decision-Making in a Pandemic. This document, position paper, just seemed to appear out of absolutely nowhere, unbeknownst and without consultation or forewarning amongst patients, vulnerable groups or organisations. On page 8 of the document, it is stated that good decision-making is maintained by using explicit and transparent processes and having clear lines of accountability. Why then have we no idea who drafted this framework, who represented the patients, vulnerable persons, disabled persons and the public in drafting this document? There is no reference to the European Convention on the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, the Irish Constitution, the Equal Status Act, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, amongst other international instruments. In fact, there seems to be no references to any well-established ethical or legal frameworks, except a statement on page 15 that reflects the WHO guidance for managing ethical issues in infectious disease outbreaks. The document also gives no idea of how it dovetails with professional codes of conduct for healthcare professionals that have a strong human rights base. We believe the ethical principles and values outlined in the document should be clarified further in plain English and shared widely, including through social media, with the public. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Catalina Devendas, in her statement on March 17th, COVID-19, who is protecting people with disabilities, she stressed that persons with disabilities deserve to be reassured that their survival is a priority and urged states to establish clear protocols for public health emergencies to ensure that when medical resources are scarce, access to healthcare, including life-saving measures, does not discriminate against people with disabilities. To quote her, she says, "To face the pandemic, it is crucial that information about how to prevent and contain the coronavirus is accessible to everyone," she explained. Public advice campaigns and information from national health authorities must be made available to the public in sign language and accessible means, modes and formats, including accessible digital technology, captioning, relay services, text services, easy to read and plain language. Organisations of people with disabilities should be consulted and involved in all stages of the COVID-19 response, she concluded. What has sometimes been neglected, including by legislators and policymakers, is that protecting the right to health is in itself also a hard legal obligation of states. Merely protecting public health in a general sense is not enough. Rather, what is required is protecting the right to health and all that a rights-based response entails, including notably equal protection for all persons without discrimination. For example, Article 25 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it sets out the right to the health of people with disabilities. It includes the provision of the same range, quality and standard of healthcare as others, and the prevention of discriminatory denial of healthcare or health services or foods and fluids on the basis of disability. On March 26th, a group of UN Special Rapporteurs published a joint statement, again reminding states of the principle of non-discrimination in the provision of life-saving interventions. Among the groups highlighted are people with disabilities, people who live in residential institutions or who are in detention. They call on states to provide additional social protection measures so that their support reaches to those who are most at risk of being disproportionately affected by the crisis. The following day, the UN expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons, Rosa Cornfield-Matt, she published a statement. Among other things, she said that triage protocols must be developed and followed to ensure that such decisions are made on the basis of medical needs, the best scientific available information, and not on non-medical criteria such as age or disability. Some other key issues of concern to patients, and especially those of us who are vulnerable or who have disabilities, are what we commonly refer to and understand as next of kin and consent issues. Decisions around treatment such as DNR, CPR policies, advanced healthcare directives, and other end-of-life decisions raise very serious moral and ethical questions for everyone. The reliance of next of kin to make medical decisions in emergencies has no legal basis in Ireland. It is also important to note that while the HSE has a consent policy, which was last updated in 2016, it is not fully compliant with the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and neither is the Assisted Decision-Making Act of 2015. Unless the family member has been given an enduring power of attorney which has taken effect or is appointed to the committee ward of court under the ward of court process, they have no legal authority to make decisions about the person's medical treatment, including the withdrawal of life-saving, sustaining treatment. The HSE consent policy also states In emergency situations where a service user is deemed to lack capacity, consent is not necessary. The health and social care professional may treat the service user provided the treatment is immediately necessary to save their life or to prevent a serious deterioration of their condition, and that there is no valid advance refusal of treatment. Future COVID treatment, medicines, trials and vaccines, questions of concern. Article 10 of the UN Convention obliges the state to protect the right to life of persons with disabilities. All lives have equal value. Decisions based on the distribution of life-saving resources must not be based on the presence of a disability. The World Medical Association ethical guidance for the provision of life-saving treatment states that in selecting the patients who may be saved, the physicians should consider only their medical status and predicted response to the treatment, and should exclude any other consideration based on non-medical criteria.
Jackie, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're just quite a bit over on time. So just to give you a bit of a warning shot for one.
All right, okay, I'm on the last bit anyway. Okay, right. So I'll skip one part. All right. So there's nothing specific in the Assisted Decision-Making Act about clinical trials and the capacity to choose to participate in those. So the same general rules would apply as with capacity to make other decisions. Of course, there's still the doctrine of necessity in our common law, which would permit doctors to make emergency interventions to save a patient's life without that person's consent. Finally, I'd like to say just a few words about access to medicines, including any future vaccines for COVID-19 and the human rights duties of pharma. Based on the historical experience of HIV and other epidemics, there is reason to be wary of profiteering by pharmaceutical companies if and when a vaccine emerges. We need to reclaim the focus on health, human rights and the public interest in an industry that has for too long been driven by profiteering. We need to invoke and further strengthen the power of government and the duty of the pharma industry to abide by the UN guiding principles on business and human rights to ensure that future drugs and vaccines are widely affordable and accessible to patients and populations worldwide. Thank you.
Jackie, thank you very much, and I'm sorry to have rushed you a little bit
okay.
at the end. That was a really insightful topic. Thank you. Dr. Kerkorian, can I just double check that you're with us?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. So I think what I'm going to say is going to echo some of the discussion started during the first session. As you can imagine, as an international medical humanitarian organization providing life-saving medical care in more than 70 countries, MSF knows very well what it means to not be able to treat people because the needed medicine is too expensive or simply not available. I think one key realization that needs to take place in the context of the current unprecedented crisis is that it's high time that we stop pretending that the reliance on the market mechanism is fit to provide medical care and health tools to all the people who need them. Of course, since its creation, MSF has experienced the gaps and the barriers such a model is creating. The Access campaign of MSF has worked to tackle them for more than 20 years now. With the COVID-19 right now, every single person on the planet can experience firsthand the failure of the current pharmaceutical system. So for each of us, we know, it can mean no diagnostic, no treatment, no ventilator, no vaccine. And of course, for society as a whole, it's a disaster. But before COVID-19, we knew that the number of people who are excluded from access was and is growing in every country, including in the most wealthy ones. People lack access to new saving treatments. 7 years ago, it was mentioned earlier in the discussion, obvious rationing started with hepatitis C medicine. And since then, the problems became obvious in many disease areas, whether it's diabetes, cancer, rare disease, and so on. But countries are also experiencing increasing shortages of old products that are of no interest for pharmaceutical companies because there is too little money to make with them. In the recent year, the stress for many countries was the lack of, as it was said, basic antibiotics such as penicillin, such an old product, but very good product like insulin, adrenaline, atropine, lidocaine, etc. And right now, in the context of the COVID pandemic, as Andrew was mentioning, again, key antibiotic like amoxicillin, doxycycline, but also morphine, reagent for diagnostic are missing. And in fact, even if you can buy them, sometimes they are simply not available, or they have been sold to somebody who is the highest bidder. As it is the case with some vaccine, and for instance in MSF we experience it with the HPV, the issue is often that there is a limited number of companies controlling the market through monopolies, but also through oligopolies, and relying on a limited number of API manufacturers. So the source of the raw material. The consequence of limited availability, as a consequence of this context, we see public health policy based on rationing now spreading globally. And if you look at what's going on now, the fact that diagnostic is not part of confinement policy in many countries, it's only the case because these countries, such as my country, France, do not have the capacity to generalize testing. Basic equipment to prevent the spread of the epidemic, we've said it, face masks, gloves, basic protection material, but also life-saving equipment like ventilators are missing. This is the result of local capacity decreasing or disappearing because governments decided to count on globalized supply, in the belief that the market would provide these tools as and when needed. And in fact, what we've seen is that countries have slowly relinquished their power to exert their health sovereignty, which is their power to protect and promote health and health services. I think we're in a key moment because although all this is true, we also can, I think, change the trend and redesign the organizing of our health system in ways that really are about improving health for all people. The funding of the vaccine against COVID-19, I think, is, for instance, an opportunity, of course, to put the resources on health priorities, but also to plan the condition of access from day one. And as Ellen Toon was saying, this is happening right now. Very simple questions need to be asked and answered publicly. For instance, so what exactly do we need? How much exactly does it cost? Who is paying? How do we guarantee access for all